This is Democracy Watch. Mark, we've all seen the images from these viral town halls across the country where Republican constituents are coming into Republican town halls to yell at their Republican elected officials for not asserting their own authority against Donald Trump and Elon Musk and their overreach. Well, we have news now, and I'll put this right here on the screen, that Republican Party leaders are suggesting that if lawmakers feel the need to hold such events, they do teletown halls or at least vet attendees to avoid scenes that become viral clips, according to Republican sources. And so if they must feel the desire to hold these town halls and to actually face the voters, that they take steps to protect themselves. Can I have your reaction to this in light of what we've seen across the country?
I mean, this is more of the same cowardice that we see from Republicans day in and day out. You know, there's a part of me that thinks that their strategy is, if you don't like the weather, like, don't turn on the Weather Channel, right? Like, act as if it's not happening, right? The problem that Republicans have right now is not the mode of communicating with their voters. The problem Republicans have right now is that their own voters understand that they are being betrayed by Donald Trump and his administration. They understand that what Elon Musk is doing threatens jobs in their communities, threatens services that they rely upon. And most importantly, as you point out, they recognize that the Republicans in the House are completely spineless. They are beyond spineless. You know, they're like a puddle. You know, they don't even have form. They're just like some liquid on the floor that Donald Trump can step in and maybe his shoe gets a little wet, but then he just walks on by.
I made the analogy the other day on one of my videos that these people are so spineless, it's the equivalent of a baby deer in the middle of a 6-lane highway.
That is giving them, you know, baby deer at least have
a little
like
bit more
bone
courageous
structure. Like they have bone structure. They're able to propel themselves on their own. Yeah. I mean, like that is being way too kind to the Republicans. And so now what they're doing is they are figuring out how to hide from their voters. And I want to emphasize one of the things you said. These are not just Republicans in swing districts, right? This is not like Republicans in a, you know, who like Brian Fitzpatrick, who has a very swing district, who is, you know, worried about that. These are Republicans in solidly Republican districts being confronted by Republican voters. And so they've got a real problem on their hands, and hiding from the voters is not going to make that better.
I think one of these town halls is a plus 23 Republican district. That's Marc Alford, an R plus 23 district. So to your exact point, these districts are heavily Republican. These are, you know, we've said this before. These are not places where they're organizing district-wide BLM protests. These are districts that have been solidly Republican in many cases for decades. I know McCormick's district, for example, another R plus 22 district, I believe, that's been Republican for 67 years. And yet these people are coming out to push back. And if I had to equate this to anything, it looks a hell of a lot like what we saw in 2018, where Republicans were trying to strip away the ACA. And we saw, even in these red districts, these voters come out and start to begin pushing back on their Republican officials who decided that they would operate independent of what their voters actually wanted.
Yeah, and this is actually, I think, quite a bit worse. First of all, because, you know, we are in presumably the honeymoon period of the Trump administration, right?
Right.
Like, this is the period of time when presidents are usually super popular and their agenda is the most popular thing. Like, this is the give away the goodies part of the program.
So are you suggesting that trying to cut Medicaid, which has over 85% support in the United States, is not if it doesn't exactly bode good things for the rest of this administration?
Right. Exactly. Right. I mean, so that's number one. Number two is you mentioned Medicaid, and you know. In this sense, it is like the ACA in that the voters understand the truth. Like there's not like a sales job going on here. It's not like the voters don't know what cutting Medicaid would mean for them and their communities. It's not like this can be spun. This is wildly unpopular. And Donald Trump has set up a dynamic to make actually Congress the bad guys. Like the Republicans here have actually been set up by their own president, because Donald Trump continues to say, I'm not in favor of cutting Medicaid. I'm not in favor of cutting all these programs.
Food
and he
stamps
is leaving it.
Yeah.
like food stamps, right? And so he is leading the Republicans to be the bad guys when these budget proposals are being put forward. And that, I think, it means that Donald Trump is not planning on walking the plank, proverbially, at the end of this politically, when Republicans become unpopular here. I suspect Donald Trump is going to say, well, not me. I mean, I don't know why they were doing that. I mean, I'm not in favor of that.
Well, I would push back on one thing, and that is this idea that they're not going to try to spin it, because already we've begun to see the sprouts of what they hope will germinate into their full-blown defense, and that is this idea that all of this is warranted, necessary, and justified because they're just rooting out fraud. And so we know that they're going to try to cut $880 billion at least. And that's important too, because we know as part of the budget blueprint that it was at least $880 billion from the ENC committee. We know that it was at least $230 billion from the Ag committee, which of course oversees food stamps. And so we already know the beginnings of what they're going to try to use as their defense, and that is the idea that they're just going to try to root out fraud. And so what is your reaction as we see a situation unfolding right now where they're going to make these cuts, it's going to impact regular people, but they're going to basically cosplay as just rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse, even if they have to pretend that all $880 billion is just going to be fraud?
Yeah, again, this isn't going to work because it's going to impact real people.
Correct.
This is the thing is you can play the waste, fraud, and abuse game as long as you are not actually affecting services, right? So you can say, look, I'm going to cut taxes and it will be paid for with cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. Then you don't actually cut anything. The deficit goes up, and people sort of are theoretically impacted by that, but not practically impacted. Here, the problem is they're actually going to cut these programs, and cutting these programs will have real-world impact for their voters. In fact, what's ironic, Brian, and sadly ironic, I mean, I take no pleasure in this, but as you know, Brian, this is actually going to hurt Republican districts worse than it will hurt most Democratic districts. So, the people who are going to be hurt the most are the people in these districts, and they are not going to be able to spun out of believing that they have been hurt when, in fact, they have been hurt.
Yeah. Although that's not going to stop Republicans from trying. And we've seen the advantages that are conferred onto the GOP by virtue of their hermetically sealed media ecosystem. And so, I would be floored. You could knock me over with a gust of wind if we actually see any of those real life stories break through when you're watching Fox News or Newsmax or OAN or being featured on, Dan Bongino's show, which if he continues it while he's prosecuting media figures at the FBI.
Why give up?
Why give up now? That's right. After all, most of these people are getting into government to try to get successful shows. So if you've already got one, why stop now? But I would be floored if we see any of these actual stories actually break through on right-wing media. But it will break through in the rest of the media ecosystem, and it's going to be increasingly difficult to insulate this stuff. Medicaid impacts over 85 million people. Food stamps impact over 40 million people in this country. If you think that just by virtue of leaning on the insulation of right-wing media that you're going to be able to evade accountability for this stuff, I think Republicans are in for a rude awakening here.
Yeah, and I want to add one thing to that. You're kind of more of an expert in this than I am, but it's hard for me to know if the Republican members of Congress are playing dumb or they are dumb. I mean, one of the things is that they seem very surprised that they're being told that these cuts are real and that these things are taking place and that this is all. And what I can't tell is if that's because, it's not what they are hearing on Fox News. It's not what they are being told. Or whether they actually know better because, they're members of Congress and they actually should be knowing better because they have staff to tell them. Yeah. And that it's all kind of the usual game of, oh, geez, I haven't heard that. That isn't true. Do you have a sense, are these congressmen completely out of touch or is it just a cynical ploy?
Cynical ploy to the nth degree. These people know full well exactly what they're doing, and they built it this way. So basically, the ploy that they're perpetuating here is that all of them are saying, well, this budget doesn't cut Medicaid. This budget doesn't cut food stamps. How dare, pull out the fainting couch. How dare anybody in the liberal media or on the left say that this is going to cut Medicaid and food stamps? That's not what I'm voting for. I would never. But they know full well that the budget blueprint actually seeks to eliminate that funding from the committees. So if you're taking $880 billion out of energy and commerce, for example, if you're taking $230 billion out of ag, the only mathematical way to eliminate that amount of funding is to cut Medicaid out of ENC, food stamps out of ag. That's the only way to do it. And so they have this layer of protection where they can say, well, I wouldn't put my name on anything that specifically cuts Medicaid. I wouldn't put my name on anything that specifically cuts food stamps, but I'm perfectly content to just mandate cuts to these certain committees where the only way they can actually enact those cuts is to cut the programs that they are pretending they wouldn't dare touch. And so it's just this cynical ploy. They all know full well exactly what they're doing. They're playing these gymnastics. The rubber's going to hit the road when, after this blueprint is done and they actually have to go through and make these cuts. That's going to be the difficult part, because now that they've passed this budget resolution blueprint by a vote of 217 to 215, the next part is actually going to be to go through in each of these committees and say, okay, here's where the $880 billion is going to be cut from ENC. Here's where $230 billion is cut from ag.
Right. And that's why I said I think that this is where Trump is setting them up. Because Trump is not, at the end of the day, going to be like, yes, I agreed to cut Medicaid. He is going to say,
this is the budget they sent me.
Correct. And he's going to say Congress did it. That's 100% right. In fact, he will say Congress did it and I made it better. It would have been worse.
Right.
I used my power to protect people. And he's not going to stand by this and say that it was his doing or his OMB's doing or his ag department's doing or, Kennedy's doing. He's going to say, oh, that was just Congress. And as usual, the Republicans in Congress will be a total doormat. They will just, they'll just take it because, like I said, they're just kind of a puddle.
One thing that I think is especially insidious in all of this is that they're targeting Medicaid, but they're not expressly, or at least right now, targeting Medicare. And I think that the reason that they're doing that is because they know that folks who are recipients of Medicare are a voting bloc that votes consistently, that has a lot of political power. The voting bloc that are recipients of Medicaid, we're talking about disabled folks, we're talking about children, tens of millions of people, kids in the Children's Health Insurance Program, even in food stamps, there's 40 some odd million Americans that receive food stamps. This is not a reliable voting bloc. These are not folks who have or exercise a ton of political power. And so they had their goal of trying to strip away healthcare or lifelines that folks need because they need to find some way to even moderately offset what they're going to need for tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires. And so knowing that they wanted to do that, they had to do it with the least political consequences for themselves. And so they found the most vulnerable Americans who rely on food stamps and Medicaid to be able to survive. And they said, well, we know that we're not really going to get punished as much as we would if we targeted, overtly targeted Social Security or Medicare, but we can get by slashing benefits for food stamps and Medicaid because those people don't exert as much political power as the other groups do.
Right. Setting aside the complete immorality of that, like setting aside the absolute heartlessness of that, it's not going to work, at least not for the House, right? Like, here's the thing: is like that is a very Machiavellian, very more amoral, immoral strategy if you are running for president. Maybe even in some Senate races that will work. But in these House districts in midterm elections, where you have a House that is currently divided by a single seat, right? Like it is enough of a constituency. It is enough to switch enough momentum in enough races to flip control of the House.
There are some of these districts that are repped by Republican members of Congress who have as much as a third, or a quarter to a third of Medicaid recipients.
Right. So it is a insane thing for the House Republicans to be going along with, like even just for their own narrow interest. It may be, that it isn't enough to affect, like I said, who wins the presidency, electoral college, or even control of the Senate. Though I think there are other problems Republicans have in the Senate. But when you look at how close the House is divided and where these recipients fall, boy, I mean, it's almost like they're just like, okay, you know, like if Donald Trump wants us to give up control of the House, I guess we'll just give up control of the House.
Right.
And again, the primary lens to look this through is not a political lens. It is to look through what is right for the American people. And, you know, to bring us back to where we started, these folks are hiding from their constituents. They are hiding from the people who they were sent to Washington, D.C. to represent. They are hiding from the people who are the most vulnerable, who rely on these programs, and who, as you point out, these elected officials know they are screwing over. And yet they are doing it anyway because they are so spineless, they are such cowards that they do whatever they have to please Donald Trump.
Right, to their own detriment at the end of the day. Well, look, that spinelessness stands in stark contrast to the fearless journalism that you and your team are doing at Democracy Docket. Highly recommend for anybody watching right now, if you want to support good, strong, independent media and also support Marc and his team for all the work that they do to protect democracy across the country, please sign up for Democracy Docket. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. And it's an amazing resource that I use on a daily basis, and you will not regret it. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.